Welcome back to Data Protection Gumbo, everyone. This is Demetrius, and of course, I am your host. And today we have a fantastic guest lined up for you today. So I'm welcoming on Daniel G., who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Plerion on the show. So, Daniel, welcome to Data Protection Gumbo. How are you today?
I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Well, nice. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now with different roles and responsibilities. And your title is one that I do not see often, Chief Innovation Officer. But tell me about number one, Plerion, and your role, and also how that title end up becoming what it is today.
I'm in the same boat as you. I thought it was amazing, and I got to choose it. so
Yeah.
that's why
Okay.
it is what it is. But firstly, so Plerion is a cloud security company, and my background is in sort of cloud security, leading security teams, and I just love doing security research. So it was a natural fit for me to join Plerion, and then to do the innovation thing. Now, what does an innovation thing mean? Or what does a chief innovation officer do? Well, I effectively have two remits. Number one, brand, and number two, product.
Okay.
So the brand side of it you can think of as my job is to increase the number of people that know about Plerion, who we are, what we do, and have a positive association with us. So that's the kind you can think about that as evangelism. And
Right.
then the
Okay.
second And then the second part of my role is really about driving innovation inside the product. So, how do we differentiate the product? How do we make it better, more interesting, get better results for our customers, and that kind of thing?
And I am very glad that you mentioned evangelism because, of course, that is a title that I really love, and I actually created a title of technical evangelist as well. But what's the intersection from where you sit?
Yeah. So firstly, I think it's a really fit, as in if you're being innovative inside your product, if you're going out doing interesting research, you're trying to solve customer problems in new and interesting ways. I think
Hmm.
the outputs and the outcomes of that naturally lend themselves to being talked about. Like, so it's not only I want to tell the customer that we're doing things in a new and interesting way, but I want to tell everyone because people want to know about new and interesting ways of doing things. So I think that's probably the most important bit. And then secondarily, it's once we have the innovation, once we have the research, it's telling the customer, look, you can do your work in a much simpler way or a different way that gets you better results and that kind of thing.
Okay. And so, since innovation is in your title, how do you drive innovation throughout a company? Do you have a secret formula, or have you figured out a process to have all the innovation that Daniel has like brought to the customer or prospect, right?
Yeah, I'd love to give you the formula, but I don't have one. I think it's more of an art than a science. But I do think there's one key aspect that I'd really love to talk about.
Okay.
And that is like you can't just go and tell the whole company, go be innovative, go do innovation. Even if you set up some structures, people have their own incentives, they're working on their own sort of pipelines of work, all of that kind of stuff. And so you can't just say, hey, go do innovation. And
Hmm.
I think there's one important thing that we can all do and that we've done at Plarion, and that's give people a decision making framework that pushes them towards innovation. And at Plarion, we've coined this framework our product principles. And so we have
Okay.
this mission that says simplify cloud security, and then the principles define what does it mean to be simple. So I'll give you a couple of examples of the six principles that we have.
All right.
So simple is quick time to value. So that's basically about reducing clicks that people have to do in the product, right? How can they quickly get to the outcomes that they want without any fuss?
Hmm.
Another one might be simple solves a problem. So everything that we do or everything that we build in the product, behind it, we have to have defined what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And you'd be
Right.
very surprised. as to how often product companies don't know what problem they're trying to solve. They're just
Yeah.
building stuff. And then the final one I'll give you is simple is where the work is. And that's all about, hey, we're not going to force you to do things our way. We're going to figure out where you're working, how you're working, and then put the work there. And so we've got
Mm.
three other principles. I don't have to mention them all, but
Okay. Yeah.
the idea is, okay, if you're a product person or anyone in the company really, and you're figuring out what should I do next? What should I be working on? How do I build this thing? What should it look like? How do I design it? You take these principles and you apply them to that decision making. And that essentially, the idea is it drives you to be innovative because it says, for us, innovation means being simple. And so, how do I be simple? It's look at these principles and then judge what I'm doing on the criteria of the six principles.
Okay. Yeah, I like the simplicity aspect of the innovation point as far as, and you mentioned cloud security as well. And so I really want to tap into that whole cloud security term because you know that ransomware and cyber criminals, and I mean, there's not a day goes by that there's not some type of headline, some business is down, data was exfiltrated, ransomware hit, backups are wiped out and eradicated. I mean, it's a digital war that's going on right now, and we are literally up against a lot globally around the world, right? So no one is left out, and the internet has no boundaries. I mean, what is it? The world is flat. As what's his name? Friedman, Thomas Friedman. He wrote a book called "The World Is Flat." It's kind of an old book, but just from a cloud security perspective, is there more innovation that can be done around cloud security from where you sit?
I mean, always. So
Okay.
we'll touch on the ransomware point in a sec, but in
Hmm.
general, cloud is extremely complex. Like for anyone who's ever done any work inside the cloud, it's just you there's so many services, there's so many different ways of doing it, there's so many different permissions, so many things that can go wrong, all the vulnerabilities that you can have, the misconfiguration. And so you can't just do things the sort of old manual way. And
Hmm.
really, a lot of the innovation in cloud is about figuring out what's the most important thing, right? Because
Right.
so many things, there's so many best practices and compliance standards and things you could do, and teams are extremely busy. They don't have the time to deal with this stuff. The
Hmm.
innovation is really about what do we do first? What's next? What's the most important thing? And how do we get rid of, or how do we make the extra stuff really simple or on by default so you don't have to worry about it?
Okay.
But I think your ransomware point is interesting. And I think modern organizations that start with the cloud and don't have an on premise infrastructure at all and do everything via SaaS, I
Hmm.
think they're finding it much less of a problem than the old school
Yeah.
companies.
Right. And you know what? Yeah, it may not be ransomware, but there could be a misconfigured setting, a bucket, or I mean, you really have to either have a tool that can go out, like an AI driven tool, go out and looks at all your configuration options. So why aren't we encrypting it? Maybe you want to check this box here. So you may not have a SaaS application that is really, or the statistics may not be pointing to ransomware, but you definitely have vulnerabilities and you have places where you can actually be vulnerable as far as misconfigurations. And I read a lot about that today. Are you seeing something similar or different?
Yeah, absolutely seeing the same thing. And the trick is, like, if you mentioned a bucket with potentially confidential data in it, the trick
Hmm.
is really an organization might have hundreds or thousands of buckets with data in it, and maybe half of them aren't encrypted, but maybe half of them host a website. And so the trick is like finding the very specific things that you have to turn on and you have to care about encryption, and
Hmm.
ignoring all the rest of the stuff, because you only really care about encryption on that bucket if it's confidential data that you don't want to share externally. Maybe there's a compliance requirement, etc. But if it's
Right.
just public data, you don't need to worry. And so like that's really the trick, is because otherwise it's wasting teams time going and
Mhm.
dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we could probably be on here for a couple of hours just kind of going over all these little security controls and there's so many little things, and cloud is definitely complex, and that's why we see all these startup companies that are popping up everywhere with funding. And I saw some charts that were pretty phenomenal around. I think I saw one company, they have $1 billion in funding. And I was like, wow, that is a lot of money to borrow for a technology that you think you have. And so I want to step back to the human side of it. And we could talk AI in a minute, but the human side. So if someone is looking or listening right now to the podcast and they might want to venture into the side of technical evangelism, or maybe even give themselves a title like Chief Innovation Officer or some title like that. What advice would you give to them in order to prepare themselves to move into a role like that, or to maybe even pitch their manager or counterparts to convincing them that, hey, maybe I deserve a title like that. Look at my credentials.
Yeah, lots of advice. Some of it hopeful. So the first thing I would say is expertise in something. So whatever it is
Hmm.
that you're interested in and want to be an evangelist about, go do that thing. Go really deep. Play with, if it's a technology, go play with that technology. Really understand it, because you're going to have to be an expert in that thing if you want to go evangelize it. And then if you go and do that, you want to start forming your own opinions about that thing, because
Mm.
no one wants to hear the same old thing that's in the standards that everyone's already read and that everyone's already heard. And so you really have to have some kind of insight and differentiated opinion. And if you do that, if you go have that deep expertise, you'll start to form opinions about what's working, what's not, and what's interesting. And then the follow on from that is, if you do have that differentiated opinion, start writing about it. Or in fact, start writing for any reason. Just go ahead, whether it's a daily LinkedIn post that's, one paragraph, or a tweet every day. Writing is almost the most important thing, because it helps you really structure your ideas and it helps you start to communicate. And there's this beautiful thing that happens on the internet, is if you
Mhm.
produce bad content, no one cares. No one's going to read it. Like, you might
Mm,
get some person might randomly find it and post an abusive comment, but at the start, when you don't have an audience, no one will care. And so the cost of doing something bad is zero.
right.
But if you do something good, then people start to see it and people start
Mhm.
to recognize you. So you've got this beautiful tool in writing that allows you to start learning to communicate with people and gives you immediate feedback about how you're doing. And that's really how you're going to build your evangelist skills over time.
And I'm glad you said that, because it's not as painful as it used to be to write now, because you have all these different AI tools out there, Chat GPT, right? There's thousands maybe right now. And you can't say that, wow, you know what, I don't have any ideas, because you can pop that into Chat GPT. Hey, give me an outline of cybersecurity, cloud security, and some of the vulnerabilities. What can I write about? And literally start with a list of ideas and even an introduction in a paragraph. And you just go and, okay, here's what they wrote, but here's what I'm thinking. So you humanize it, and then you maybe put it in your own words, and it gets your creative juices going, so you can actually create a cohesive, nice blog post out there. So there's no excuse, which is what I'm saying, if you say you can't write, because writing is a big component of being an evangelist. What about, Daniel, as well, what about being, let's say, customer facing and not being afraid to do things like podcasting or a webinar or a keynote or some type of speaking engagement? Would you also recommend that as well, or maybe some tips on someone who's afraid to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend it. And I don't know anyone who's not afraid of public speaking or podcasting at the very beginning. Even the most
Yeah.
extroverted people, they have reservations, right? They say,
Hmm.
I'm nervous. Like, I'm always nervous at the start
Yeah,
of
me
these
too.
things. And
Mhm.
I've done conference presentations for thousands of people. But you've got to start somewhere, right? You eventually you have to start. And your first interview, your first conference presentation, they're probably not going to be your best. And you just have to
Yeah.
accept that. It's like learning any new skill. If you're learning to swim, you're probably not going to be a very good swimmer at the start.
Mhm.
So just, I mean, you've got to start somewhere, have a go. If you have an opportunity, just say yes, obviously. But then the biggest thing is you're going to feel better and better about each thing the more you prepare. So the more nervous you are, the more that's a sign of prepare. Like write out your speech, practice it in front of the mirror, go have someone friendly, like a spouse or a friend, listen to you, etc. And just practice and prepare. And eventually you'll feel more and more comfortable about it. And if you keep doing that over time, you'll find that the quality and how interesting your presentations are goes up and up.
Okay. Is there a length of time, or let's say someone has to really hone their craft around maybe writing, okay, I've written 15 blog posts, or I've written a white paper, or maybe 10 white papers. What piece of advice would you give to someone who may have already started down this path, but they're still unsure about maybe being an evangelist or a chief innovation officer, or maybe even what a field CTO, or let's say any type of goal that they're looking with a title that makes them stretch?
Yeah, look, I think it's the same sort of advice we always give to our children. It's like, don't
Mm,
stop, don't give
yeah.
up. If you still feel like it's the right thing and you've still got a passion for it, just keep going. I think
Mr. Beast, yeah.
Mr. Beast has this video where he talks about, he says to people, your first 100 videos are going to suck and no one's going to watch them. So just
Okay.
go and get started, make the first 100. And it could be, it could be 80 for someone, it could be 200 for someone. But the point is, it's going to be horrible at the start. And you have to accept that. And that should be your expectation. And so as you're doing this, you can tell yourself, you know, hey, this is what hard looks like. This is what I expected, and it's happening. Okay, I've just got to push through this. And eventually you'll get past that thing. Like, how long did it take you before you felt like your podcast was a great piece of content?
You know what? I still question myself. Every episode, I am always analyzing and looking and trying to figure out what I can do better, because I'm just a really harsh critic of myself, because I guess it's that whole student and learner in me that I want to continuously do better. And I am just always trying to figure out a better way to do things. So maybe that's not the answer that you want to hear, but
No,
it's a definite hard one for me.
but that's the other key is
Yeah.
every episode you do or every article you write, you look back and you try and fix or improve one thing, one small thing.
Mhm, mhm.
And it doesn't look like you're improving from one to the next. But if you take the whole sample of 100 or 200 things that you've done and improved a small thing each time, it becomes a huge change over time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I know we were chatting before we hit the record button, and I mentioned that I watched the NVIDIA keynote by Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, and I was just blown away by what they're doing and the technology that they're rolling out with artificial intelligence and this whole Blackwell platform. It's kind of scary with the advancements of what's going to happen with the robots. And man, it makes layoffs and kind of what's happening right now just in technology even more. It's putting that into perspective. So where do you see AI taking us? Man, maybe a brief response on that. I know you may not feel like Elon Musk, who was doom and gloom, but now he's probably back down to earth now. But what are you seeing there, and what are your feelings around AI?
Yeah, look, it's so the starting point is it's already helping us. You've already mentioned that it helps you in your creative process, or there's no
Yeah.
excuse not to write. I think it's really helping people get started, and it's really uplifting the people who I guess are at the bottom or might not have the requisite starting skills for something. It's really lifting them up. So the baseline for performance in any sort of knowledge worker role is going up. And so that's
Yeah.
the first thing. And so we all have to start utilizing AIs and LLMs for our work. Otherwise, we're not going to meet that baseline. And I think that's really positive. But there's definitely a doom and gloom side to this. As in, I worry that I'm going to be replaced by an
Yeah.
AI. It might not be today, it might not be
Hmm.
tomorrow, but in 10 years, what does a security professional do when the
Right.
LLMs are reading all our code and understanding it perfectly and are fixing the bugs for us,
Yeah.
etc.?
Yeah.
And the reality is, I think, with all of these transformative technologies, is that we always find a way to do the next thing. And
Yeah.
we always find a way to employ people creatively for whatever happens after AI, and we get the productivity boost from it.
Yeah. I love that outlook, Daniel. I really do. And I appreciate the time that you've spent with us here. Just talking a little bit, just two guys chatting about roles and especially evangelism and innovation and kind of the human aspect of what's going on today. Not diving too technical into things, but maybe touching on that a little bit. So I appreciate your time today, and maybe a shout out that you have with, for Plerion or someone else that you just want to mention, or something you want to mention within the podcast here.
Sure. Well, if you love security research and deep insights into the cloud, then I'd suggest jumping on our blog at blog.plerion.com. That's where
All
all
right.
our research goes. So have a look at that.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you for being a guest and taking time out of your day to share your insights with us and your experiences as well, Daniel. So I appreciate that. And before I let everyone go, I do want to mention the Backup and Recovery Professionals group that I run. And there's almost 26,000 professionals in that group: storage, cybersecurity, backup, disaster recovery. There's so many great conversations happening in that group, and that's on LinkedIn. So please go to LinkedIn and just type in Backup and Recovery Professionals and join the group. And you can join the conversation there as well. So thanks for viewing and thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, stay secure and back up often.